welcome to another episode of Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience, and I'm very excited to bring to you the guests that we have for today. Before I get into that, let me just let you know that you can get show notes, including links to the books that we talk about. You can always subscribe in iTunes there at ericnevins.com. That's where everything about the Halfway There podcast lives. I would sure appreciate it if you check that out, including our Facebook page. We have the Halfway There podcast community. Again, just go to ericnevins.com and you can find the link right there on the front page so that you can connect with us, and I'd love to hear from you. Well, today I have a very special guest. This is somebody, I say in our conversation, that really has always been in my life. In fact, she knew both of my parents before they were even married, and that's just a cool thing. But she's always been known to me as the lady who went to France. And, she shares the story of how she came to Christ at a Billy Graham crusade in Des Moines, Iowa, which is also my hometown. How she was called to the mission field, which is fascinating. And her ministries, including what made her question whether or not she'd made the right choice, and get this, meeting Francis Schaeffer over there in Europe. This one's called Follow the Lord's Leading, a conversation with Carol Wilson. Okay, well, hi, Carol. Thanks for joining me today.
You're my privilege, Rick. Eric.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to explain that just for my audience. So Carol is one of those people who's, like, I think you've probably always been in my life. Going way back, you went to the church that my parents went to as kids and teenagers, right?
That's right. I had them both in youth group, I think.
Yeah, right. So that's why when I started thinking about other people to have on the show, you were one of the ones that came to mind. And I'm really excited, just based on our pre-conversation here, to hear your story, because I know that there's bits and pieces that I'm aware of, but I know there's a lot more to it.
Sure.
But that's cool. So Rick is my dad, just for the audience. That's what everybody calls my dad, and it's okay with me if you call me Rick or Eric. Carol, you just decide.
Yeah.
Great. Well, what I like to do on this show is just start out and have you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing these days, and then we'll go back and dig through your story.
Okay, sounds good, Eric. Yeah, I am Carol Wilson, and I live right now in Des Moines, Iowa, where I was born and raised. But, actually a suburb, Altoona, Iowa, if you want to get real specific. And, I was started teaching school. I'm going to go through my conversion and so forth quickly.
Sure.
And then I ended up teaching or being a missionary in France for 36 years, and never thinking that I would be a missionary. That was probably the last thing that I was thinking.
Yeah.
But I did, and now I've been back 13 years. I went back to the church that Eric was talking about, that his parents and that I formerly attended. I'm attending it now, and and worked with the children's ministry for a while when I came home. But right now, I'm just volunteering in the jail as a chaplain. I work with the ladies there, and a group called Freedom for Youth, where I volunteer, and in my own church. And I just came home from our food pantry and had some interesting conversations this morning.
Oh, awesome.
But maybe we better go back to the beginning, huh?
Yeah,
Eric,
let's do that. So that's great. And I don't know, I don't know if it's interesting to anybody, but I think it's so cool that you live within, walking distance or eyeshot even of all of my grandparents also, right? You guys are all kind of right there together. So
yeah, we're neighbors, and your mother and I are going to the fair together this Wednesday, the Iowa State Fair.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So I guess for the audience, we have connections. We go back. So that's exciting.
That's right.
All right. Well, so take us back. Tell us a little bit about your family, what it was like growing up out there in Altoona. That's the east side where I'm from too, of course. And
sure.
I'd love to hear that.
Okay. Well, I came from a family that wasn't, they were not Christians. No way. In fact, my dad was quite a drinker, and when I was growing up, swear words continually came out of his mouth, But they made sure that my brothers and I have three brothers today. The youngest one wasn't in the picture then. He's been a missionary now in Turkey for 35 years. But my other two brothers and I would go to different Sunday schools in the neighborhood. And unfortunately, I have to say that I don't think a couple of those churches were using the Bible. They didn't open the Bible, because had you asked me if something happened to me back then, will I go to heaven? I would have said, of course. And if you'd asked me why, I would have said, because I'm a good little girl. I go to church or Sunday school every Sunday, and then I try to be honest, kind, and good. I didn't know anything about Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So the church that Eric is talking about, that his parents and I grew up in, I have to say that a man knocked on our door when I was 9 years old and talked with my mother. And like I said, had she been bald, you could have sold her breasts, because she was easy to convince. And he just asked her if her children had a Sunday school, and she said, yes, they do. When he asked her which one, she couldn't remember which one it was. So he snuck in and said, how would you like it if we started picking your children up on a Sunday school bus? And like I said, she was easy to sell things to, so she said that would be fine. So she informed us kids that the bus would be picking us up. And I have to say, the first Sunday that I went, I didn't like it. The bus was okay, but when I got there, now the people were loving, but they told me something I never heard before, that I was a sinner and I needed a Savior. I had never heard that before, and I didn't like it. But because the bus would come to our door every Sunday morning, we had to keep going. Well, a year later, when I was 10 years old, Billy Graham came to town here in Des Moines and had a big crusade. It lasted, I think, 10 nights. And the final night, my father and mother went forward, and I did too. But I remember what was interesting was my dad's high school buddies came around him, and they said, this is wonderful, Miles, that you've accepted Christ. And they looked down and they saw his kids, and they said, what are you doing with these kids? He said, well, they're my kids. And they said, well, they've been coming to our Sunday school on a Sunday school bus.
Oh, wow.
This was really interesting. And they said, well, we've been praying for them and their family. We didn't know it was you. So it was just automatic that we'd keep going to this church Sunday school. My folks, right the next weekend they started, we were in church. And I have to say, I saw and I should say that night was the night that I didn't do it at the crusade, but I was so guilty. By the time I got home, I knelt down by my bed and asked Jesus Christ to come in and to forgive my sins. And he did that. Oh, I had the assurance. I know many people struggle with assurance of salvation, but that was real for me that night. And it has been ever since, I have to say. But I saw our home, what Jesus Christ did in that home. He turned it right side up. I never heard a swear word come out of my father's mouth after that. He never took a drink. I mean, it was just like a changed place.
Wow.
And it really had an effect upon our kids, upon, us kids, very much so. Yeah, and so then after that, junior high, high school, I mean, I was a Christian. I wished I would have shared Christ more when I was in high school. And then I thought I was going to a Christian college. I won't name the college. It was supposed to be, but it was really a mission field. And I was really disappointed because I really wanted to get into a Christian college. But I know the Lord, that was his will for me, because it taught me to stand up on my own 2 feet and be a witness for him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So can you give us an example? Do you have an example of like how God did that in college?
Well, it's just that, this was supposed to be a Christian college, but I saw kids, they weren't living like they should have been, and it was a denomination, I'll say, where they keep things to themselves. I mean, I was used to people, sharing Christ and that type of thing, but they didn't. I mean, it was just kind of understood. I've been back to some of my reunions now, and these kids would say, oh, yes, of course I was a Christian. But, they didn't talk about it. I was used to hearing people share their testimonies and so forth.
Sure.
But anyway, some of those people I've remained friends with, and they've been very much they're really active for the Lord, if I can say that today. But at that time, it just wasn't. It was very weak, the Christian witness in that school. So when I got out, I found a job, a teaching school. I was a physical education major and started teaching up in northern Iowa. I taught there for 1 year, and then the superintendent where I had gone to school called me and said, we're reorganizing. Eric, you've probably heard of Southeast Polk.
Oh, yeah.
What used to be Altoona, Runnels, Mitchellville, those towns went together and it became Southeast Polk.
Oh, gotcha.
So then I taught there. The superintendent said, would you like to get in on the ground floor? And I thought, why not? So I went back there and I taught for 3 years. And in my third year, I loved it. I loved my teaching. I thought I'd be doing it the rest of my life. But it was, I have to say, one morning in a church service, we had I remember a special speaker from Indiana, I think he was, and he was talking about giving, not missionaries, but giving, how financially and everything. But I can say in that service that morning, the Lord really called me to the mission field. Now, I'm going to tell you because people wonder, what did he say in an audible voice? Carol, you need to go to the mission field?
Yeah.
And that wasn't anything like it, Eric, nothing like that. I acquaint it with a verse in Romans 8:16 that says, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And I use that to show that it was just like the Holy Spirit was bearing witness with my spirit that I should quit my job and go to the mission field. It just seemed so convicting and convincing that I did just that. I mean, I was I think it was in the springtime, and I resigned my job, and I had a perfect peace about it, even though I loved what I was doing. And then I knew I would have to have some formal Bible training, so I went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago for a year. I think I'd been there during a couple years previous to a summer school. So I knew the school, and that's where I ended up. And it was while I was there studying that I had no idea where I was going. I probably thought South America, Africa, or the Far East, because that's where I knew missionaries from. And so I thought that, I went to different prayer groups in the evening, prayer bands they called them, and one of the first week I saw this European prayer band, and I thought, why are they praying for Europe? And then I looked over and I saw North American prayer band, and I thought, oh, I get it, they pray around the world. Mm-hmm. And so I went into that European prayer band, and it was very dynamic. So I went there quite often, and I remember with this one time when a missionary came in from, I think he was British, and he came in and told us that he was a missionary in France and told us that there were 136,000 towns and villages in France without a gospel witness. And I thought, what? And just little by little over the year, I can say things happened in my life, different things that caused me to just see the need in France. And so then another thing was, what mission should I go with?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hey, Carol. So I wanted to tease this out a little bit because you made the point, but I think it's worth just kind of punctuating that. So the call that you felt wasn't verbal or wasn't audible. Some people do have that, but not everybody.
That's right.
But you felt that God was calling you, and then like looking back, the way I hear you describe it is you can see God clearly directing you to a place. I suppose now it's a lot easier to see,
very
right?
much
Than
so.
it was
Yes.
then in the midst of it, which is important. But I can, you can kind of see it as you're describing. Oh yeah, God was directing you to this place, and the Europe, group was more vibrant and interesting. And whether that was just you or just the way the group was, but God directed you there because that's where He wanted you to go, and
That's right.
and it wasn't a burning bush. It was just His the Spirit in you leading you.
That's exactly right. Just little by little. I mean, France, Europe, I didn't know that was a mission field.
Right.
But when he said that, 136,000 towns and villages without a gospel witness.
Yeah.
And then fortunately, I didn't know this before, but when I got there, I heard that it was called, from fellow missionaries and different people, that it's called the graveyard of missionaries still today because it's there's so little results there.
Yeah.
And, yeah. But anyway, Eric, I went. So I went, and that was another thing. I felt the Lord very clearly leading me to this mission called TEAM, the Evangelical Alliance Mission, that's located in Wheaton, Illinois. And so I went to their candidate school. That's when I didn't know where I was going for sure. A missionary from France was there, and I went to all different countries, trying to figure out where I was going. And that's when I would say the Lord really convinced me there that I should go to France. And
when you visited?
Pardon?
So you visited France and
No, I never
okay.
visited France. That was in candidate school.
Oh, gotcha.
I had to decide which country I was going to, and when I went there, I had some convictions about France, but it was just during there that a missionary from France was a representative. They had him from every country all over.
Oh, okay.
But when he spoke, I felt the conviction of the Holy Spirit that that's where I should go. And so, my church, it was almost 100 years old. They've had many famous, maybe not many famous, but quite a few pastors from the church leave. Like if you've ever heard of Ray Ortlund out in California.
Oh, yeah.
Very famous. He was raised in our church. And but no, a missionary had never gone. And believe me, I didn't think it was going to be me.
Oh, yeah. I actually went to school with his son.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did.
Eric?
And yeah, I think his son is Eric, actually. When
I
was
think
at Trinity.
maybe that's right. Yeah.
That's
a
pretty
wonderful
cool.
family.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm following him on Instagram. Well, that's cool. That's awesome.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, so I ended up in France, and my support came in quite quickly in that it didn't all come from my church, but a good share of it, because they were so excited that someone was finally going to the mission field that they were really behind me. But anyway, I had, in fact, someone came and said, you have your support. And when I told Team that, they said, oh, no. You don't just need money, you need prayer support. So I went around to different churches, and then, people would come alongside and support me, but it was mainly from my church to start out with because they wanted a missionary so badly, and they were so excited.
I love that. Okay, I have to tell you a story.
Okay.
So one time, I was probably when I was in high school. What you just reminded me of this. I was going on about how it might be better for like missionaries if they didn't have to visit so many churches.
Yes.
And as a missionary, maybe you can give me. I had no experience. I was just a kid, so what did I know? But I was thinking, maybe it'd be better to just if a church funded somebody more, funded a missionary more, so then they could be part of that congregation more directly.
Yeah.
But what my dad said, this is the part I wanted to say. I was discussing this with my dad one time, and he said, well, the thing is, what they need is not just money. They need to spread the prayer base around so that there's more people praying for them. And which is exactly what, Team told you, which is interesting. And it makes me wonder if maybe my dad got that from you at some point, but
I don't know.
It had a profound effect on me, as far as that goes. Cause I was trying to think as somebody who was interested in ministry, how can we do things in new ways that would be, effective, but there's a reason for some of the stuff we do.
Absolutely, Eric.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
But the mission told me you need not only money, you need prayer support.
Yeah.
So I didn't do what they do today. I mean, and then it depends on where you come from. I mean, you don't get your support. It might, and if you have a family, I mean, I've been single all my life, but a family, it takes a lot more money too, and it depends on the country you go to. France is an expensive country, so you have to raise quite a bit of money there. But anyway, back then, and of course over the years it increased.
Right.
It didn't seem so much when I first went, but you had to continually, reach out and reach more people and more churches if you could, and, get your support. Because my mission, and I think most missions, you can't go back until you have your full support.
Right.
They won't let you leave. Anyway, in 1967, I took off for France. not knowing. I didn't know a word of French. In college, I had to take language, but I took Latin. I heard that. I had heard that that was the easy way around the language course. And at that school of French, we had an excellent professor, but I didn't know that. So the first thing when I got to France, I had to go to language study 5 hours a day, and then come home and just beat my brains out at night trying to get this. And I couldn't figure out. I just was so far behind. This was, a beginner's course, I thought. That's what they said, the beginning course. But everyone was catching on so quickly except me. And I think it was probably at the end of the first week, I went out at break time and I said, how are you guys doing this? You're catching on so fast. And they said, well, actually, I had 4 years in high school. Another one would say, well, I had 2 years at the university. I said, but this is for debutantes, beginners. Well, we just wanted to start over again.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness. So actually, I had never flunked anything, but I flunked my first French course. And
wow,
did
that cause you to question? Did that cause you to question it all?
Oh, very much. I thought, here the Lord, I cut all my ties back home, and everything, and here I am. It was like going out on a limb of a tree and sawing it off behind you, and I'm failing. But the Lord, He showed me. I mean, it caused me to reach some other people. In that second class, one guy now I just visited. He and his wife up in Wisconsin. I mean, he was running away from the Lord, and the Lord caused me to confront him, challenged me to confront him. He was coach of the year in California for small Christian schools, and just amazing what the Lord has done in his life, in and through him. And just other people. And now as I look back on it, I know it was the Lord's will, and I just took the course. It was a little higher course at that time. But Eric, here's another thing. I thought it was not very nice that the mission had me stay there for 4 years the first time without coming home. I'm not sure they do that today. But I thought, 4 years, and I don't get to go back on furlough?
Yeah.
But as I look back on that now, I can see why they did that and the Lord's hand in that. Had I gone home after flunking that language course after a year, I would never have returned. But just sticking it out there, the Lord caused me to see, you're going to make it. You're going to make it. And I did, and I don't speak French. I never did speak French perfectly, but when you're just immersed in it totally, you get so. In fact, now I'm having problems sometimes here in the States. Years later, I can't think of the English word.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the French are really particular about their language, too.
Oh, they very much are, very much. But anyone, like I said to my French pastor when I left 13 years ago, I said, which of the missionaries don't have an accent? He said, Carol, you all do. You all have an accent. But I think mine was a little worse than some of them. And I remember, I hated that. First, every time you opened your mouth, they would say, vous êtes anglaise, that you're English. I'd say, no, I'm American. The French have a hard time many times to distinguish between a French or an English and an American accent. But anyway, every time I'd open my mouth, but then the Lord gave me the idea, use that, Carol. And I would say, and then many times they'd say, what are you doing here? When I'd say, and I'd say, well, I'm here because Jesus Christ changed my life, and I want to share that with others. So if I'd been French, they would never have asked me, like, what are you doing here?
Right.
So that I realized that wasn't so bad after all, and it gave me an opportunity to share Christ with people that would, interrogate me, like, what are you doing here, Anyway, Eric, I guess I can tell you that I stayed there 36 years, and I saw many churches planted. I started, I thought I was going into a youth ministry, but France back then it was, I think, about 0.5% born-again Christians.
Wow.
Today they would say it's about 1%. I heard recently and read that.
Wow.
1%. But that's pretty much the picture of all of Europe.
Yeah.
France, I talked to Francis Schaeffer one time when he was over in France.
Oh, wow.
You know who Francis Schaeffer is?
Yeah, you got to tell me that story.
Yeah, well, he was at a conference, and it was very small down where we had a camp in the French Alps, and he was speaking. So a bunch of us went there. I think I was one of the few Americans. So he was delighted to speak with somebody in English. So he went out and he said, anytime, he told me this, he said, anytime I have a chance to go to Brussels, or to, I should say, Belgium or France, I take the opportunity because it's so spiritually barren.
Hmm.
Now, the other countries, too, in Europe, to think our heritage comes from there, but it's so barren, spiritually speaking. And, it's really, really sad.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting to me. So I'm hopeful that I have a friend who actually wants to go to France as a missionary in the southern part, and I think to minister to some of the Muslims there.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So I'm hoping to get him on in a couple weeks. We're gonna interview, or we're gonna chat as well. But uh, it's what's interesting about that is that the whole thing with our heritage and the Christian kind of thing. It seems like there's in history there's been a lot of places where Christianity had been centered for a period of time, right? The power, or whatever you want
Right.
to
Well,
call it.
think of Germany, where
Yeah.
the Reformation, and Switzerland,
Right.
and John Calvin, who was French and ended up over in
Yeah.
Switzerland. They kind of put him out of France.
Right.
But
Well,
these great men of God, and
er,
I mean that's our heritage. But now the people, years later, they've turned Christianity off.
right. And even if you go back further, you think of it like the center of Christianity for the longest time was in northern Egypt,
Right.
and in other places. So that sort of is a trend, and I don't know if you look at history that way. I don't know that we should be too shocked that what's happening in America now is happening. It
Right.
tends to be the way that it goes, but God's people have to still love and take care of other people, and that actually is our witness, not our political involvement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you've got to realize that France has the biggest Muslim population of any European country.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yes.
So okay, so you were over there. Do you have any stories? I'm curious. I'd like to hear about your ministry. So you were witnessing to people and you planted churches. How many churches did you plant?
Well, I was in, let's see, I think, 4 different churches.
Okay.
Now, one had already started, but I was in 3 that we started from the ground up. Now, I always worked with the pastor and his wife. People say, I think my heart goes out to pastors today trying to please everybody, and they say, how did you make it 36 years in ministry? I said, well, I was never the pastor.
Right.
I worked behind him.
Right.
Yeah. But my mission, I think we have about 25 churches over there. They started them back in the 1950s. And then youth ministries, we have different things like that and that we're involved in. But what our job, your job is to work yourself out of a job. You try to replace yourself with French pastors.
Hmm.
We even have a couple converted Muslims that are pastors in our churches.
Wow.
One just texted me or emailed me and said, happy birthday. My birthday was this past week, and I thought, wow, he's still preaching the gospel over there. That's really exciting.
That's awesome.
That's the country, and I have a fellow missionary. He's working totally right now with the Muslims in Marseille, France.
Oh, interesting. Well, so
Yeah.
what would you want to say? Like, so one thing I like to do here is, especially with you, so somebody who has a perspective that is, not the same as like a, suburban kind of perspective. What would you want people in the church to know about France, or to know about, besides obviously you mentioned that it's, spiritually a dark place.
Well, I would say pray for France. There's many countries to pray for, and pray
Sure.
that there would be, people willing to go over there. That's so important.
Hmm.
New missionaries, they can always use more, I'll tell you. Just think of what's been happening in France lately. You can see, I mean, the priest that his throat was slit here 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
then, of course, in Nice, France, where, what was it, 84
Oh,
people
yeah. That was
killed?
that was
Yeah.
particularly horrific.
Yeah, but it's just, Yeah, it's really a challenge, and maybe the Lord raise up people to go over there and
Mm.
share the word with them. That's so important.
Right. Well, okay, so I'm gonna just say this here because I don't know. Maybe there's somebody who's listening to this now or in the future who God is calling to go to
Hmm.
France or to
Hmm.
someplace else. And by hearing your story about how God called you, maybe God's calling them. Maybe God's saying, "Hey, you didn't know the end result, right? You didn't know you were going to end up in France when you said, "Okay,
No
Lord."
way. No
Right?
way.
You said, "Okay, I feel the Lord calling me and I don't know all the details, but I'm going to take a step." And so you went to Moody and then you took another step and you ended up with the mission and then, you confirmed where you were going to go. And that was exactly where God wanted you to be. Um,
Absolutely.
so friends, if you are listening to this and you feel like God is calling you, just do one step. That's the encouragement.
One step at a time, you
That's right.
betcha.
And see what he'll do, and you just never know. I had to start
Hmm.
this podcast that way. I told you it took me 2 years to get it going. And
Hmm.
I just had to keep doing one step and get the next piece of equipment and do it. And right now, we're doing great. People are
Wonderful.
hearing it, and I think it's encouraging a lot of people. So that's when you
Absolutely.
hear God's call. That's what you got to do. Go ahead, trust it, and
You
take one
betcha.
step. All right,
That's great.
I'll get
Great.
off my soapbox there. Like I'm curious about stories. I'm sure you had a number of people who came to Christ. Are there any? Did you have any particular conversions that stand
Well,
out to
one
you?
that just comes to mind, this one young man, I forget, somebody led him to the Lord, and he came to our church, and he was very concerned about his family. And his brother well, to begin with, he wasn't interested. And I was working with the youth in our church, so we would. I remember one time we were at my house, and in my apartment, I should say, and I had the youth there, and this kid, he was even going out and picking up kids, but he didn't really care about the gospel. He didn't need Christ. His life was going pretty good and everything, but I'll never forget. What was that? Oh, that Hollywood film with I can't think of it. Anyway, we showed it, and it about this school. I can't even remember it
Oh,
now.
did
That's
it have
terrible.
Robin Williams in it? That one?
Yes, Robin Williams.
Oh, Dead Poet Society?
Yes,
Is that the one? Yeah, yeah.
Dead Poets Society. That was it. Well, we showed it because I thought it was really good about that one boy that stood up. He wasn't afraid. So at the end, I got up on the table, my table in my
Nice.
little dining area, and I said, who would be not afraid to follow Christ, and all that.
Uh-huh.
And I had been talking to this young man, so when he went out, I said, DDA, where are you with Jesus Christ? He said, I don't see my need, or something like that. And I said, I dare you to do a Bible study with me. And he found out he had to go to the service. So in 6 weeks, we went through this Bible course. And, the whole church was praying for him because his brother was there and everything. And so I'll never forget, right at the beginning, or when he was finished with the course, on the back page, I think it was called What the Bible Teaches, it's an Emmaus Bible course. And it says, what have you done with Christ, at the end? And I said, and I just asked him, he said, well, I wrote it in here. Yes, I accepted Christ last night, or something like that.
Wow.
And I said, DDA, would you be willing to share this? Because he was coming to church even though he said he didn't need God or, anything. So I said, could I share this with our pastor in the morning? Would you be willing to give a testimony? He says, yeah, okay. So when we got to the church, the pastor was standing there, and I said, DDA has accepted Christ, and he's willing to share it. So we got through he gave an opportunity for people to share their testimonies, and DDA, he didn't say, I'll do it or anything. And so finally, the pastor just said, DDA, I heard that you accept Christ. Would you like to say something? He said, well, I was going to stand up and pray. He said, well, let's pray. And so DDA prayed and thanked the Lord for, coming into his life that week when he did it, and I'll tell you, there were a lot of tears in the church that morning. People crying because they had been praying for him, and to hear his testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a vibrant Christian. He's one of the officers in the church now today over there in the last church I was in. It's just exciting to see, and he has 3 children, and the one daughter's a teenager, and I think she's on a mission trip or something. She has been. But it's just exciting to see these lives that have been turned right side up for Jesus Christ.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I still hear from a lot of them. I can go on and tell you stories, but we don't have time.
Sure.
I think I've used up my time.
Well, we're close. Can I ask you 2 more questions?
Sure.
All right. I want to know, because I love the triumphant stories, and we've been through some of those, and I think God is so amazing when that happens. Do you have any times? Did you ever have a time when God seemed distant or far away, or maybe you were disappointed with God?
Well, I have to say, in language study, I thought, what in the world?
Yeah.
I must have got the signals mixed up, because here I come over here and I flunked my first French course. How could this be the will of God?
Right.
But sometimes you go through down times, but you stick in there, and you have to. And I look back on it now and said, thank you, Lord. I say thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength, and that the mission you just didn't come home. I mean, I could have quit, but I was too embarrassed to do that.
Right. What books have impacted you the most? Obviously the Bible, but what?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Besides that.
He That Is Spiritual, I would say that was one that
what was it called?
Really have impacted me.
What was it?
I'm thinking, is that He That Is Spiritual?
Okay. Okay.
I'm trying to think if it was Schaeffer. It's somebody from Dallas Seminary.
Okay.
And then one I have to say, Eric, that recently is really, I say, that has just been one of the best I've ever read. The Promise by Tony Evans.
Okay.
The ministry of the Holy Spirit. I mean, he covers it from A to Z. He's just excellent. He's one of my favorites.
Nice. All right. Well, I will put those on the show notes. So I always put a...
look up He That Is Spiritual.
I found it. It's Louis Schaeffer.
Louis Schaeffer. I thought that's... Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Louis
great.
Schaeffer, yeah.
You know what's great is I haven't heard of that. So that'll be one that I can pick up.
Yeah. Well, it's an old one, but that
out.
really had an effect on me. I think when I was at Moody, I read that.
Nice. Well, I love that, because there's a lot of good stuff out there that...
for sure.
I mean,
But The Promise by Tony Evans, that is excellent.
Okay, great. Well, I'll put that in the show notes, and if people want to get it, they can go to ericnevins.com and find your page, and then they can get it there. They can click the link and get it right there off of Amazon.
Wonderful.
Great. Well, awesome. Anything you want to leave us with?
No, if you're willing to follow the Lord's leading, He is able to lead you exactly where He wants you. I mean, I never, ever thought that I would go overseas. That was the farthest thing from my mind. And I have to say, Eric, too, that when I was probably under conviction or wondering if I should accept Christ way back when I was a kid, I thought, what if I said yes? You never know. He might send me to the mission field or something. No, I don't want to invite Christ into my life.
Right.
But it's been a wonderful experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Oh, that's awesome. Kara, I thank you so much for your time. You're
welcome, Eric.
Thanks for sharing your story.
And I'm glad you're doing this podcast. I'm going to tell people about it.
Awesome. Thanks. Wow. Thank you, Carol, so much for sharing your story. I just appreciate that a lot. Thanks for connecting with me and for sharing everything that the Lord has done in your life and it is doing. That is wonderful. Guys, I hope that you were blessed by this conversation. I hope that, maybe even the situation going on over in France. We talked a lot about the Europe was certainly Christendom and a place where there were many believers for centuries. And today it's very small and very minuscule. And certainly there's reasons for that. But they need to hear the gospel. And is God calling you to go there? I don't know. Not my job. But it is my job to ask the question, and you can think about it, pray about it. Maybe he's not sending you to France, maybe it's somewhere else, or maybe it's just to the person who lives next door or sits in the cubicle next door to you. I don't know, but who in your life needs to hear the gospel? I think from Carol's passion to share that, that's what I take away from this episode. What do you take away from this episode? Why don't you let me know? If you go to Facebook and hit me up on the Halfway There podcast community, you'll see this posted there. And you can leave a comment and let me know. Or you can go to ericnevins.com and leave me, hit the contact button and leave me, send me an email. Whatever you want to do, I'd love to hear from you and hear how this conversation impacted you. All right? Hey, until next time, keep the faith, friends.